Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
Correct. We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. Damien, you're up this week. What are you bringing to the table today once you recover from
you can't do
laughter?
stuff like that and expect me to be okay. Yes, I don't even know where I am right now. I have brought two pieces to the table for us today that are both focused on poverty here in the United States. So the first is called The Rise of Poverty, Inc. by Ann Kim, which was published in The Atlantic just earlier this month. And the second piece is called Places Across the U.S. Are Testing No Strings Cash as part of the social safety net. And that was written by Jennifer Ludden and published in NPR back in March. So the piece in The Atlantic is all about the big business that poverty is in this country, specifically how helping the poor has become this huge business and profit-making machine here in America. There's an analysis around how that business has effectively been mishandled and done in a way that isn't in the true best interest of actually serving and helping people in need.
Right.
And then the piece in NPR explores how there are over 150 basic income pilot programs being run across the country and what the impact of these programs have been and what the long-term effects of these programs could mean for impacting poverty in this country. Mm-hmm. So I thought both of these were really great pieces, and I thought they worked really well in tandem as a way to explore different aspects of some of the issues surrounding poverty in this country. So I'm excited for us to have a conversation about them and talk about what we learned and took from them. So yeah, where do you want to start?
Yeah, I thought these were really insightful articles about different ways to address poverty. You know, the piece from The Atlantic describes the ways that we've been spending money ineffectively, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the NPR piece is exploring some of the more direct ways to affect change in poverty, which is namely giving people money.
How about that?
Yeah. So, and let's name the reason why we need these kinds of deals is that our economic system purposefully creates poverty conditions for people.
Yes.
There are winners and there are losers in this system, and we're supposed to take pride in this and strive to win, strive to be on the winning team. But when there are people who lose no matter what they try to do or how hard they try to do that, then none of us are really winning in this system because everything is at the expense of the people at the bottom.
That's right.
And so I appreciate this piece in The Atlantic for naming the ways that the bureaucracy moved from public agencies to private boardrooms as we witnessed Reagan's neoliberal privatization of programs and the critique that we're spending money on these programs with private firms who have little to no impact on poverty because if there aren't people who are in poverty, they're no longer going to make money.
Yes.
So the incentive there has been flipped. Yeah, and I think the NPR article offers some really solid ideas, some really solid projects that people are doing around the country of how we actually alleviate poverty, which is giving people money because the economic system doesn't allow for them to have the money that they need to be able to survive effectively.
Yeah, what a concept, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Our economic system is set up in such a way that it functions in a way that impoverishes people.
Right.
That puts people in a position where they can't make ends meet. And as you said, I think really brilliantly, the shift to these programs and corporations effectively meant that these companies don't care to solve poverty, right? Because they won't be in business anymore. And no one, I love that you said that, no one wins in that situation, right? If we've got folks who can't make ends meet, no one wins in that situation. I firmly believe that. So that's good stuff. One of the things I appreciated learning about in The Atlantic piece was this idea of poverty being big business.
Yeah.
So the fact that since the 1980s, there have been companies that exist to profit off of poor people, but under this guise of trying to help poor people. Mm-hmm. And so there were a couple of examples presented. I pulled one of them because it just kind of blew my mind as a case study, if you will. This example of tax preparation services for low-income folks. And Kim says this, quote, "Walk around any low-income neighborhood in the country and you're likely to see sign after sign for tax preparation services. That's because many of the people who live in these neighborhoods qualify for the federal earned income tax credit, which sent $57 billion toward low-income working taxpayers in 2022. The EITC, the tax credit, is a cash cow for low-income tax prep companies, many of which charge hundreds of dollars to file returns, plus more fees for, quote, easy advance refunds, which allow people to access their EITC money earlier and function like high-interest payday loans. In the Washington, D.C. metro area, tax prep fees can run from $400 to $1,200 per return, according to Joseph Lightman Santa Cruz, the CEO and executive director of the nonprofit Capital Area Asset Builders. The average EITC refund received in 2022 was $2,541. Tax preparers might help low-income families access a valuable benefit, but the price they extract for that service dilutes the impact of the program. So that's the end of the quote there. And that was wild to me. So I was trying to think, like, in what world is it okay? In what world are folks sitting in a boardroom saying, let's have this service for low-income individuals and families to get help filing their taxes, to access this incredible tax credit benefit, but then charge them upwards of half of their return for them to get it, or half of their refund to get that money.
Yeah.
Upwards of half of it. I think the logic there makes no sense. And as you said, it perpetuates this ecosystem of keeping wealthy corporations rich and poor people poor. And I just think that's really shameful if we're really committed to providing services to help folks with things, complicated things like taxes. We should really be committed to helping them, and this ain't it.
Yeah, and with tax returns and refunds in particular, like the IRS already knows how much all of us owe them or how much they owe us, but we go through this
song and dance
of sending them paperwork. And so there's also ways that we don't need to do it this way. Other countries aren't doing it this way.
That's true.
But here we are. So
the American way.
Yeah. One of the other things that stood out to me that I learned about for the first time, because I don't think it hasn't been part of the conversation around the welfare reform law from 1996, is how it allowed for contracting out welfare services.
Yes.
So this is based on ideas from the Reagan administration, where he wanted to privatize as much as he could, as I mentioned earlier, because they believed it would be more efficient. The thinking was that public agencies were also self-interested, and they weren't serving the public because they wanted to maintain their control over the services that they were in charge of and receiving money for from public funds, receiving a budget for. So the theory goes it would be just as effective, more so maybe, that a private company could administer these things like welfare services because they're in a marketplace with competition. This is all paraphrasing the article too, by the way, up until this point. These are contracted services, right? You are a company, you sign up you submit a bid to receive a contract to then provide these services, which means you no longer have competition.
Right.
Because you have a contract for however long that contract is for.
Ding, ding, ding.
And so, yes, maybe there are outs and maybe there's this and maybe there's that, but no one else has the experience to maintain that service in the way that you do because you've been doing it for however many years.
Right, and you won the bid to do it.
So, like, we're no longer talking about a competitive marketplace.
Yes.
And the answer isn't, well, let's just make it a competitive marketplace. No, the answer is public. Like, make it public again. Stop privatizing stuff.
Yes.
Because we're just funneling money into a private company who's focused on their bottom line and their shareholders, if they're publicly traded or, privately owned or held, whatever, rather than paying the salary and benefits to state or federal employees who could be managing these processes and programs, thus making the programs less efficient and less effective because the companies are only in the service for the maintenance of the contract rather than serving the public. There's this idea that the public agencies were also self-interested. Sure, maybe that's true in some ways, but to say then that they're just as self-interested as a private company is patently false. Like, that's not how that works. It's not how it's played out over the course of time, right?
No.
Like, if we use prisons as an example, a private prison has to, and makes the states that sign contracts with private prisons have a certain number of people in the prison.
Yes, you need
a public prison exists, theoretically could exist and still exist empty.
Yeah.
Because the state foresees a future need for it to exist, but currently it does not have people who need to be imprisoned. But that's not going to work for a private company. So the same logic
Principle,
bears
logic.
out across all of these
Absolutely.
other services that have become privatized over the years.
That's a great example of this. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I learning more about this was really fascinating, though, this welfare reform law and its impact.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's wild to me how inefficiency and ineffectiveness are apparently just cornerstones of government adjacent programs and certainly these contractors. It's just sort of a part of the system that I guess we have been forced to accept and like we are unfortunately left to deal with. So that's really good stuff there too. I did want to talk a little bit about the NPR piece because there were some great insights shared in that. As I mentioned, that piece explored cash aid programs or basic income programs around the country, which I think in the past, has been somewhat of a radical idea. But then the pandemic happened, right? And lots of folks received stimulus checks and child tax credits and emergency rental payments, which made the idea of this a little less radical and a little more accessible because we all benefited from that in some way. And so the idea of these basic income pilot programs is that low to moderate income people receive somewhere in the range of $500 to $1,000 each month for a year or two. And the point of that is to help combat poverty, to help them meet some of their basic needs. And I think that's pretty amazing, given that the NPR quotes the president of an economic advocacy organization who shared that the United States has more poverty than any other rich nation in the world. Yet our social safety net is one of the stingiest. And especially when there are certain restrictions on how other social welfare programs work, how they can be used and can't be used by individuals.
Right.
And so these basic income programs help to fill that void in a lot of ways for folks. And so I think there's a lot of value in these programs as a way to try and break the cycle of poverty in this country and to hopefully, as you mentioned earlier, like break the way our systems were designed and continue to be designed to work.
Yeah, and I think if you think about it, giving somebody $500 a month who is not making enough to pay rent or whatever, or they want to find a new career and get educated, it gives them more money in the budget to figure out how do I do those things.
Yes.
Right. And they talk about that in the NPR piece too. Another aspect from the Poverty Inc. article that I found fascinating, but I've never thought much about, are job training programs, which are privatized under the initial set of programs that President Johnson launched with the war on poverty back in the 60s. But these job training centers are ineffective and costly to participants. They had something quoted about a place in California that was about dog grooming, and it cost $6,000, I think. I'm pulling numbers out. So whatever the program was, let's say it cost $6,000, and then the quarterly earnings for those people who went through the programs and received that certificate was $5,000.
Oh my goodness!
So they're eventually making a return on investment for their education in going into this particular field of work,
right?
But it's not the lucrative thing.
Not at all.
So, and as I read about these, I was like, why do these exist? Why can't these be job training programs as certificate programs inside of community colleges?
Yes.
Which we already had across the country. We already had an infrastructure to do things like this.
Yep.
So it doesn't really make sense outside of somebody must have been lobbying somebody to talk about how to do this.
Yeah.
But we could use federal funds in community colleges to expand these programs and give people the opportunity to learn additional skills inside of institutions that are already serving the public very, very effectively.
Yes.
Community colleges have really great satisfaction ratings across the board.
They're what's the word? They're in their communities. They know their communities. They know their community's needs. And so that's a great idea. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just don't understand that aspect of these programs, that they're run by some private company or private individuals, however it works. But we had community colleges right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you know why that exists, right? It's all about money. It's all about money. All right, well, let's shift here our conversation over to application. So how do these pieces and our conversation today about them apply to our everyday lives and the work we need to do? I think for me, these pieces just reinforce the fact that we simply don't need these monster corporations and monopolies, this big business that Ann Kim describes in her piece. And we certainly don't need billionaires. Billionaires shouldn't exist, especially if it means that there are people living in poverty. people living paycheck to paycheck, people making impossible choices about how to spend the little money that they have, or how to put food on the table or keep a roof over their head when an emergency happens. The NPR piece, I think, quoted someone who he had a medical emergency, or it was something. The car broke down,
there's a
right?
car part that had to be replaced.
Yeah, and we've heard that story before. We've heard the story of, a medical emergency, and how do you pay the hospital bill, or do you pay your rent instead? And so these pieces just make me think about how we need to push for better programs and services to help folks in poverty that are efficient, effective, accountable to doing what's right and in the best interest of people. How we need to push our leaders to end these long-standing government contracts that are keeping these corporations rich and people in poverty. How we need to push for investment in more of these basic income programs that we learned about in the NPR piece, and other programs like it, because I think that's the work that needs to continue to happen here to give us a chance to actually make a dent and put a dent in the notion of poverty here.
Yeah, that's great. My application for this week sounds very abstract, but it gets more concrete, I think.
Okay.
So as we consider, and is connected to what you said, as we consider the expansion of these kind of programs like basic income, we have to make sure that they aren't privatized by third-party servicers.
Yes.
They will just make these programs more expensive. And as you talk about things needing to be effective and efficient for people, we can't have a private company who's skimming money off the top to make it work better for them and whatever. So as we proceed with trying to create more justice in the world, we have to shift away from privatization.
Absolutely.
Private companies aren't more effective, and we can see this in the satisfaction ratings of private medical insurance versus Medicare. So I did a little light Googling.
Okay.
Private medical insurance companies receive about 78% or less satisfaction. 78% was the highest.
Wow.
And then everybody else was underneath that.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And then Medicare receives a 92% satisfaction rating.
Wow.
For people who are on Medicare.
Okay.
So and the same holds true, I think, for other public medical services too. Even ones who might not have the best reputation they still have good satisfaction ratings for the people who are in them.
Right, compared to.
And, this has been the story, I think, about healthcare and private insurance, which is all tied into poverty as well, that like private companies are always going to be more efficient and effective. And I think ultimately it's not, because who they're beholden to matters, and the public agencies are beholden to doing this public service, and there's nobody else involved.
Right.
There's not a shareholder.
Nope.
There's not a profit that has to be shared at the end of the fiscal year. Like all of it is, it's running like a service.
Yes.
Which costs money, but it's a service to the people who need it. So, privatization is my application for this week. Like, let's quit it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that just struck a nerve for me, and I'm sure lots of folks listening, like this idea of private medical insurance companies. Like I spent I'm not in poverty. My family's not in poverty, but spent the last year dealing with family with medical health issues, and the amount of phone calls and bureaucracy and back and forth with insurance companies to figure things out and to try to reduce bills and charges that don't make sense, and then decisions made that are clearly in the best interest of the insurance company and not the patient in the end, led to lots of frustration over the past year. And so you struck a nerve there, and I'm sure lots of folks can relate to that. That's great application. All right, well, let's talk about homework. How do we want to continue our learning beyond this conversation today? I think I would like to put my money where my mouth is.
Okay.
If you get it. I want to look into what the elected representatives and leaders that I've voted for have done to end these ineffective government contracts and are interested in supporting basic income programs like the ones we've learned about. And I also want to look into whether or not Maryland has any of these universal basic income programs. The NPR piece had a link to some of the other programs that exist. They quoted some, but they've got a link to an article that has more. And so I want to see if Maryland's on that list anywhere, and also certainly just learn more about these programs in general, because they seem to be doing really great work.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think that's great homework there. Prince George's County does have a very small pilot program for guaranteed basic income for, it says 50 youth from ages 18 to 24.
Oh, wow.
Who are
Okay.
aging out of foster care.
Oh, beautiful.
So, and then over 125 seniors too. So they're focusing on people who have a very specific need based
Yes.
on their experiences.
Absolutely. Okay.
So
Very good.
Yeah, one just in our backyard there.
Yeah.
You said that and it rang a bell for me of like, there is one nearby.
There is one. Okay, good.
Yeah. My homework is also to learn more about universal basic income programs that have been piloted across the country and learn more about the outcomes. Like what
Yeah.
has it done for people?
Yes.
Because one of the things referenced in the NPR piece is that after 6 months of payments in these programs, they see measurable changes in people's psychology. There's a decrease in psychological distress. And I think there's a lot of promise in these ideas and programs, and we can figure out a way to fund these programs like this once we can accept that billionaires don't need to hoard wealth in the ways that they have been able to, and that corporations can pay taxes just like the rest of us at the same rate.
Yes.
So I think that these are things that are achievable, particularly for people who really need them.
Yes.
And there's ways to figure out how to make them work beyond, the poor social safety net that we have in this country.
Absolutely. Well, I love the reference of the sort of decrease in psychological distress because we know the ripple effect of that on the rest of your health, right? And the ways in which you're able to then show up for your family, show up for yourself, and do other things. And so that's great homework. Very good. All right. Well, thanks for having that conversation with me today about poverty. I really enjoyed that. And I think there's a lot more that we can learn and do. So looking forward to that. And you're up next time.
Yeah.
What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
I'm bringing a documentary.
Oh.
It is called Lakota Nation versus United States. So it's about the Lakota people's fight to protect their sacred land. The Black Hills in so-called South Dakota and Wyoming were illegally taken by the U.S. government in 1876 in violation of a treaty that had been agreed between the U.S. and the Lakota Sioux peoples. And this is a documentary about the Lakota fighting to reclaim that land through a variety of means.
Very good. I was thinking the other day that we haven't watched a documentary in a while.
Yeah.
So you must have, maybe you felt that. You felt my thinking about that because we didn't talk about that. So I love that. That sounds fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that. Do you have a sense of where it is? Like if people wanted to watch along?
It's on the Hulu if you want to watch along on Hulu.
Very good.
I think you can also rent it wherever you want to. If you don't have Hulu and you just want to pay to watch it once,
Yep.
you do that. Yeah, I think
That's great.
those are the places to find it.
That'll do for me. Very good. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram and TikTok. Check us out over on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.